Robinson Crusoe, Part 2, by Daniel DeFoe. Read aloud by Samantha Dunn. When I had pursued this resolution about 10 days longer, as I have said, I began to see that the land was inhabited, and in 2 or 3 places, as we sailed by, we saw people stand upon the shore to look at us. We could also perceive they were quite black and stark naked. I was once inclined to have gone on shore to them, but Surrey was my better counselor, and said to me, "No go, no go." However, I hauled in nearer the shore, that I might talk to them, and I found they ran along the shore by me a good way. I observed they had no weapons in their hands, except one, who had a long, slender stick, which Surrey said was a lance, and that they could throw them a great way with good aim. So I kept at a distance, but talked with them by signs as well as I could, and particularly made signs for something to eat. They beckoned to me to stop my boat, and that they would fetch me some meat. Upon this, I lowered the top of my sail and lay by, and 2 of them ran up into the country, and in less than half an hour came back, and brought with them 2 pieces of dried flesh, and some corn, such as is the produce of their country. But we neither knew what the one nor the other was. However, we were willing to accept it, but how to come at it was our next dispute, for I would not venture on shore to them, and they were as much afraid of us. But they took a safe way for us all, for they brought it to the shore and laid it down, and went and stood a great way off, till we fetched it on board, and then came close to us again. We made signs of thanks to them, for we had nothing to make them amends, but an opportunity offered that very instant to oblige them wonderfully, for while we were lying on the shore came 2 mighty creatures, one pursuing the other, as we took it, with great fury from the mountains towards the sea. The man that had the lance or dart did not fly from them, as the rest did. However, as the 2 creatures ran directly into the water, they did not offer to fall upon any of the negroes, but plunged themselves into the sea and swam about. At last one of them began to come nearer our boat than I first expected, but I lay ready for him, and I had loaded my gun, and bade Surrey load both the others. As soon as he came fairly within my reach, I fired, and shot him directly in the head. Immediately he sank down into the water, but rose instantly and plunged up and down as if he was struggling for life, and so indeed he was. He immediately made to the shore, but between the wound and the struggling of the water, he died just before he reached the shore. It is impossible to express the astonishment of these poor creatures at the noise and fire of my gun. Some of them were ready to die for fear, and fell down as dead with the very terror. But when they saw the creature dead and sunk into the water, and that I made signs for them to come to the shore, they took heart and began to search for the creature. I found him by his blood staining the water, and by the help of a rope which I slung round him, and gave the negroes to haul, they dragged him on shore, and found that it was a most curious leopard, spotted and fine to an admirable degree, and the negroes held up their hands with admiration to think what it was I killed him with. The other creature, frightened with the flash of fire and the noise of the gun, swam to the shore and disappeared. I was now furnished with roots and corn, such as it was, and water, and leaving my friendly negroes, I made forward for about 11 days more, till I saw the land run out a great length into the sea. Doubling the point at about 2 leagues from the land, I saw plainly land on the other side, to seaward. Then I concluded, as it was indeed, the Cape de Verde Islands. However, they were at a great distance, and I could not well tell what I had best do, for if I should be taken with a fresh gale of wind, I might neither reach one nor the other. In this dilemma, I stepped into the cabin and sat me down, Surrey having the helm, when on a sudden the boy cried out, "Master, master, a ship with a sail!" And the foolish boy was frightened out of his wits, thinking it must needs be some of his master's ship sent to pursue us. I jumped out of the cabin and immediately saw not only the ship, but that it was a Portuguese ship, upon which I stretched out to the sea as much as I could, resolving to speak with them if possible. With all the sail I could make, I found I should not be able to come in their way, but that they would be gone by before I could make any signal to them. But after I had crowded to the utmost and began to despair, they, it seems, saw me by the help of their glasses, and that it was some European boat, which they supposed must belong to some ship that was lost. So they shortened sail to let me come up. I was encouraged with this, and as I had my patron's ancient on board, I made a waft of it to them for a signal of distress, and fired a gun, both which they saw, for they told me they saw the smoke, though they did not hear the gun. Upon these signals they very kindly brought up and lay by for me, and in about 3 hours' time I came up with them. They asked me what I was, in Portuguese, and in Spanish, and in French, but I understood none of them. But at last a Scotch soldier, who was on board, called to me, and I answered him, and told him I was an Englishman, that had made my escape out of slavery from the Moors at Sallee. Then they bade me come on board, and very kindly took me in, and all my goods. It was an inexpressible joy to me, which anyone will believe, that I was thus delivered, as I esteemed it, from such a miserable and most hopeless condition as I was in, and I immediately offered all I had to the captain of the ship as a return for my deliverance. But he generously told me that he would take nothing from me, but that all I had should be delivered safe to me when I came to the Brazils. For, says he, I have saved your life on no other terms than as I would be glad to be saved myself. And it may, one time or other, be my lot to be taken up in the same condition. Besides, says he, when I carry you to the Brazils, so great away from your own country, if I should take you from what you have, you will be starved there. And then I only take away that life I have given. Nope, nope, says he, Signor Inglese, Mr. Englishman, I will carry you thither into charity, and these things I will help you to buy your subsistence there, and your passage home again. As to my boat, he told me that he would pay me 80 pieces of 8 for it. He offered me also 60 pieces of 8 more for my boy's surrey, but I was very loath to sell the poor boy's liberty, who had assisted me so faithfully in procuring my own. However, he said that he would set him free in 10 years if he turned Christian. Upon this, and Surrey saying he was willing to go to him, I let the captain have him. We had a very good voyage to the Brazils, and I arrived about 22 days after. And now I was once more delivered from the most miserable of all conditions of life, and what to do next with myself I was to consider. The generous treatment the captain gave me I can never enough remember. He would take nothing for my passage, and caused everything I had in the ship to be punctually delivered to me. And what I was willing to sell he bought of me, such as 2 of my guns and a piece of lump of beeswax, for I had made candles of the rest. In a word, I made about 220 pieces of 8 of all my cargo, and with this stock I went on shore in the Brazils. I had not been long here, but being recommended to the house of a good, honest man, I lived with him some time, and acquainted myself, by that means, with the manner of their planting and making of sugar, and seeing how well the planters lived, and how they got rich suddenly, I resolved, if I could get a license to settle there, I would turn planter among them, resolving in the meantime to find out some way to get my money, which I had left in London, remitted to me. To this purpose I purchased land and formed a plan for my plantation and settlement. I had a neighbor whose name was Wells, and in much such circumstances as I was. My stock was but low, as well as his, and we had rather planted for food than anything else for about 2 years. However, we began to increase, and our land began to come in order, so that the 3rd year we planted some tobacco and made each of us a large piece of ground ready for planting canes in the year to come. But we both wanted help, and now I found more than before I had done wrong in parting with my boy Suri. I was, in some degree, settled before my kind friend, the captain of the ship that took me up at sea, went back, for the ship remained there near 3 months, when, telling him what little stock I had left behind me in London, he gave me this friendly and sincere advice. "Signor Inglese," he says to me, "if you will give me letters, with orders to the person who has your money in London, to send your effects to Lisbon, to such persons as I shall direct, and in such goods as are proper for this country, I will bring you the produce of them, God willing, at my return. But I would have you give orders for 100 pounds sterling, which you say is half your stock, and if it miscarry, you may have the other half to recourse for your supply." Well, this was so wholesome advice and looked so friendly that I could not be conceived it was the best course I could take. So I accordingly prepared letters to the gentleman with whom I had left my money. I wrote the English captain's widow a full account of all of my adventures, and when this honest captain came to Lisbon, he found means to send over not the order only, but a full account of my story to a merchant in London, who represented it effectually to her. Whereupon she not only delivered the money, but out of her own pocket sent the Portugal captain a very handsome present for his humanity and charity to me. The merchant in London vested this 100 pounds in English goods, such as the captain had written for, sent them directly to him at Lisbon, and he brought them all safe to me to the Brazils. When this cargo arrived, I thought my good fortune was made, for I was surprised with joy of it, and my good steward, the captain, had laid out the 5 pounds, which my friend had sent him for a present for himself, to purchase and bring me over a servant. Well, neither was this all, for my goods being all English manufacture, such as cloths, stuffs, baize, and things particularly valuable and desirable in this country, I found means to sell them at a very great advantage. The first thing I did, I bought me a Negro slave, and a European servant also. I mean, another besides that which the captain brought me from Lisbon. But as abused prosperity is oft times made the very means of our greatest adversity, so was it with me. I went on the next year with great success in my plantation, and now increasing in business and wealth, my head began to be full of projects and undertakings beyond my reach, such as are indeed often the ruin of the best heads in business. To come, then, by just degrees to the particulars of this part of my story, you may suppose that, having now lived almost 4 years in the Brazils, and beginning to thrive and prosper very well upon my plantation, I had not only learned the language, but had contracted acquaintance and friendship among my fellow planters, as well as among the merchants of St. Salvador, which was our port, and that in my discourse among them I had frequently given them an account of my 2 voyages to the coast of Guinea, the manner of trading with the negroes there, and how easy it was to purchase upon the coast for trifles, such as beads, toys, knives, scissors, hatchets, bits of glass, and the like, not only gold dust, guinea grains, elephant's teeth, etc., but negroes for the service of the Brazils in great numbers. It happened, being in company one day with some merchants and planters of my acquaintance, and talking of these things very earnestly, 3 of them came to me the next morning and told me they had been musing very much upon what I had discoursed of with them the last night, and they came to make a secret proposal to me. And after enjoining me to secrecy, they told me that they had mind to fit out a ship to go to Guinea, that they had all plantations as well as I, and were straitened for nothing so much as servants. that as it was a trade that could not be carried on, because they could not publicly sell the negroes when they came home. So they desired to make but one voyage to bring the negroes on shore privately, and divide them among their own plantations. And, in a word, the question was whether I would go their supercargo in the ship, to manage the trading part upon the coast of Guinea. And they offered me that I should have my equal share of the negroes, without providing any part of the stock. This was a fair proposal, it must be confessed, had it been made to any one that had not had a settlement and plantation of his own to look after, which could scarce have failed of being worth 3,000 or 4,000 pounds sterling, and that increasing too. For me to think of such a voyage was the most preposterous thing that ever man in such circumstances could be guilty of. But I, that was born to be my own destroyer, could no more resist the offer than I could restrain my first rambling designs when my father's good counsel was lost upon me. In a word, I told them I would go with all my heart if they would undertake to look after my plantation in my absence. This they all engaged to do, and entered into writings to do so, and I made a formal will disposing of my plantation and the effects in case of my death, making the captain of the ship that had saved my life, as before, my heir, but obliging him to dispose of my effects as I had directed in my will, one half of the produce being to himself, and the other to be shipped to England. Accordingly, the ship being fitted out, and the cargo finished, and all things done as by agreement by my partners in the voyage, I went on board in an evil hour again, the 1st of September, 1659, being the same day 8 years that I had went from my father and mother at Hull, in order to act the rebel to their authority, and the fool to my own interest. Our ship was about 120 tons burden, carried 6 guns and 14 men besides the master, his boy, and myself. We had on board no large cargo of goods, except of such toys were fit for our trade with the negroes, such as beads, bits of glass, shells, and odd trifles, especially little looking-glasses, knives, scissors, hatchets, and the like. The same day I went on board, we set sail, standing away to the northward upon our own coasts. In this course we passed the line in about 12 days' time, and were, by our last observation, in 7 degrees 22 minutes northern latitude, when a violent tornado or hurricane took us quite out of our knowledge. It blew in such a terrible manner that for 12 days together we could do nothing but drive and scudding away before it, let it carry us wherever fate and the fury of the winds directed. About the 12th day, the weather abating a little, the master made an observation as well as he could, and found that he was gotten upon the coast of Guiana, or the north part of Brazil, beyond the river Amazonas. And now he began to consult with me what course he should take, for the ship was leaky and very much disabled, and he was for going directly back to the coast of Brazil. I was positively against that, so we changed our course and steered away northwest by west, in order to reach some of our English islands, where I hoped for relief. Oh, but our voyage was otherwise determined, for a second storm came upon us, which carried us away with the same impetuosity westward, and drove us out of the way of all human commerce. In this distress, the wind still blowing very hard, one of our men, early one morning, cried out, "Land!" And we had no sooner run out of the cabin than the ship struck upon the sand, and in a moment, her motion being so stopped, the sea broke over her in such a manner that we expected we should all have perished immediately. It is not easy for anyone who has not been in the like condition to describe or conceive the consternation of men in such circumstances. We could not hope to have the ship hold many minutes without breaking in pieces, unless the winds, by a kind of miracle, should turn immediately about. In a word, we sat looking upon one another and expecting death every moment. Now, though we thought the wind did a little abate, yet the ship having thus struck upon the sand, and sticking too fast for us to expect her getting off. We had a boat at our stern, just before the storm, but she had either sunk or was driven off to sea. We had another boat on board, but how to get her off into the sea was a doubtful thing. In this distress, the mate of our vessel lays hold of the boat, and with the help of the rest of them, they got her flung over the ship's side, and getting all into her, we let go and committed ourselves, being 11 in number, to God's mercy and the wild sea. And now our case was very dismal indeed, for we all saw plainly that the sea went so high that the boat could not escape, and that we should be inevitably drowned. However, we committed our souls to God in the most earnest manner, and with the wind driving us towards the shore, we hastened our destruction with our own hands, pulling as well as we could towards land. But as we made nearer and nearer the shore, the land looked more frightful than the sea. After we had rowed, or rather driven, about 1.5 leagues as we reckoned it, a raging wave, mountain-like, came rolling astern of us and plainly bade us expect the coup de grace. In a word, it took us with such a fury that it overset the boat at once, and separating us as well from the boat as from one another, gave us not time hardly to say, "Oh God!" for we were all swallowed up in a moment. Nothing can describe the confusion of thought which I felt when I sank into the water, for though I swam very well, yet I could not deliver myself from the waves so as to draw breath, till that wave having driven me, or rather carried me, a vast way on towards the shore, and having spent itself, went back and left me upon the land, but half dead with the water I took in. I had so much presence of mind, as well as breath left, that seeing myself nearer the mainland than I expected, I got upon my feet and endeavored to make on towards the land as fast as I could, before another wave should return and take me up again. The next wave that came upon me buried me at once 20 or 30 feet deep in its own body, and I could feel myself carried with a mighty force and swiftness towards the shore a very great way. But I held my breath and assisted myself to swim forward with all my might. I was ready to burst with holding my breath, when I felt myself rising up, so, to my immediate relief, I found my head and hands shoot out above the surface of the water, and though it was not 2 seconds of time that I could keep myself so, yet it relieved me greatly, gave me a breath and new courage. I was covered again with water a good while, but not so long but I held it out, and finding the water had spent itself, and began to return, I struck forward against the return of the waves and felt ground again with my feet. I stood still a few moments to recover my breath, until the waters went from me, and then took to my heels, and ran with what strength I had further towards the shore. But neither this would deliver me from the fury of the sea, which came pouring in after me again, and twice more I was lifted up by the waves and carried forwards as before, the shore being very flat. The last time of these two had well nigh been fatal to me, for the sea, having hurried me along, as before, landed me, or rather dashed me, against a piece of rock, and that with such force as it left me senseless. But I recovered a little before the return of the waves, and seeing as I should be covered again with water, I resolved to hold fast by a piece of the rock, and so to hold my breath, if possible, till the wave went back. Now, as the waves were not so high as at first, being nearer land, I held my hold till the wave abated, and then fetched another run, which brought me so near the shore that the next wave, though it went over me, yet did not so swallow me up as to carry me away. And the next run I took, I got to the mainland, where, to my great comfort, I clambered up the cliffs of the shore and sat me down upon the grass, free from danger and quite out of reach of the water.